How do we pray in real life? And so we come to this particular psalm today, and we've entitled the message, Wrestling in the Night. Question, how many of you have ever been there? Yeah. Ever been in a scenario where you just can't go to sleep? Your mind is racing. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that in those moments our hearts are just moved and moving and we just can't find peace? It does lead to a question. The question for each of you to ask yourself, some of you are saying, no, I go to sleep in 5 seconds, so I never have that scenario. But I still want to ask, even those of you who are like that, ask yourself this question. Have you ever faced a situation or a personality that left you scratching your head as to how in the world am I supposed to handle this? Have you? My hunch is if you are alive for any duration of time, you've probably been there. It starts early. Louette and I have twin granddaughters. They just turned a year old last week. They're sharp. They don't miss a thing that the other one is doing it. And you can watch them. If one finds a toy that somehow has just been discovered, the other one sees it. And even at one, you can imagine what happens, can you not? That one makes a beeline over to where the twin is, and when they get there, they decide that the toy is theirs. They actually, right now, their reaction is, let me just take it from you. Now, it's pretty raw and spontaneous the way they respond to somebody coming along and giving me a situation that is like maybe difficult to handle. But their responses are going to become more complicated, I'm sure, as they grow older, even as ours are more. Pretty soon, one of them will start crying out to mom or daddy saying that what they did, or pretty soon, you're trying to take the toy from me, I'm going to hit you with the toy. Eventually, they may do like teenage boys, just kind of go wrestle it out in the mud. We'll see who comes out on top. It sounds like a grunt of I can identify with that. You see, the sophistication of how we handle these things for ourselves grows, doesn't it? We go through childhood and into adolescence and even into adulthood, and we're still grappling with how do I handle these situations that leave me scratching my head. Rights are claimed. It's mine. I saw it first. Manipulation comes into play. Hey, if you were really nice, you'd let me have the toy. Or, I tell you what, you give it to me, and when I'm finished, you can have a chance. If that doesn't work, we go to blame shifting. Well, I didn't do anything. I know you guys have never said that. It's not my fault, it's your fault. You're the one who made me do it. And then even worse, we go beyond that into character smearing. You are just mean. I mean, you don't even deserve it. Or worse, maybe you don't love me, do you? So the question comes back around, how many of you have ever had a situation or a personality that left you scratching your head? You're not sure how to handle this issue. How did this happen in the first place? Why did it happen to me? What did I do? I mean, is this what they're doing to me even right? And as you have those questions go through your head, there's these internal feelings that you start getting. Isn't it? Anybody ever been like, when that happens, you're just hurt. How could they do that to me? Or maybe you're just dazed. You're just, I can't believe that just happened. Or frustrated, angry, or maybe over a long period of time become embittered. What do I do with these feelings that are coming up inside? How do I handle it? I mean, what do I do? Do I just ignore it? Or do I explain it away? They just didn't really mean it. Do I retreat in isolation from anyone and everyone that might possibly cause me pain? Or do I clap back? Shout. Put down. Get at it. My 4-year-old grandson, he would probably just try to take you out. That would be his response. I wonder how many of us have the question of, should I just take you out? Well, Psalm 4, and actually this whole process from Psalm 3 through Psalm 9 is what we've been talking about. It is real life that bumps up against situations that are head scratchers. And this real life leads to real conversations that get past the superfluous and down into real relationship, seeking for real rescue. This particular psalm is placed in the Psalter. We're not sure if it's written directly in context with the scenario with Absalom, but it's written and placed in the Psalter in the context of the scenario with Absalom. We recounted a lot of that story last week. David's son Absalom has totally betrayed him. And in the process, he slandered David. He's deceived the people. He has plotted rebellion. He's now run David out of town, and he is on the verge of declaring war to the end of assassinating his father. Psalm 4 is a window into David's processing of it all. What does he think? How does he feel? How does he respond? So here's what's our plan going to be for the morning. We're going to quickly look at the structure of the psalm. Then we're going to have a time where we look at some application from the psalm. And at the very end, we're going to give us all a prompt for prayer practice. Okay? So the structure of the psalm. The psalms we already have discussed are poetry. It's not roses or red, violets or blue type of poetry like we in our language understand. It's poetry that's more conversational. It's based in parallelisms and comparisons. In this particular psalm, there's 5 stanzas that are set out, and these stanzas will carry a bit of progression. When we get to application, we're going to take that apart and go in maybe a little different order than the stanzas. But you look in verse 1, and you can tell when you're reading the Psalms how the stanzas are broken. Does your Bible not have a little space that's larger between certain verses in Psalms? So that's an indicator to you of this is the way the stanzas are set up. So verse number 1 is the first stanza, and you see in there, who is it that David's speaking to? He's appealing to the Lord, and he's asking him for answers and for grace. You come to the second stanza, which is verses 2 through 3. He's not speaking to the Lord here. Who's he speaking to? He's actually speaking to his adversaries. Now, it may be internal thought conversation. Come on, tell me you do that, right? You ever had a dialogue with somebody just in your head? So he's speaking to his adversaries here. And as he does it, he's asking questions. How long are you guys going to keep this up? How long will you shame me in the place where I should have honor? How long are you going to look after lies in order to support the position you're taking? You felt that before, haven't you? You come to verse 3, though, in that, and there's a reset. He's asked the Lord for answers. He's questioned his adversaries, but the reset comes out like this. It's truth. The Lord sets apart the godly for himself. When he's thinking about this shame that has come, when he's thinking about these lies that have been perpetuated, he falls back on the fact that the Lord has set apart the godly to stand, as we saw in Psalm 1. He also goes with that and promises himself, the Lord hears. Do you see the connection back to the first stanza? Lord, answer, be gracious, hear me. Here's the truth. The Lord does hear. So you can see how he is crying out to the Lord in real life, hear me. He speaks to the actual situation, how long? And then he goes to reset himself in the truth. God takes care of his godly. God hears when I call. Stanza number 3. Who's he talking to here? He's spoken to God. He's spoken to about his adversaries. It's an internal dialogue, but he's spoken about them. But who is he talking to here? He's talking to himself. Once again, he's reminding himself both of his real experience and of the truth underneath it. Be angry, or the word there could actually be literally like tremor, or to agitate. Be agitated, but as you do so, don't sin. Ponder on your bed and be silent. How many of us, when we have hard things, want to do that? To stop and be silent. Our natural inclinations, as was even said in the opening prayer, are anything but that. Vengeance and retaliation comes forward. So he's got this first line, be angry and don't sin, ponder on your bed and keep silent. And then the second, the first, verse number 5, the second part in this stanza, actually, it parallels. Offer right sacrifices. Do what's right here, or righteous. And put your trust in the Lord. He's preaching and rehearsing truth to himself to help inform how he's going to respond. Verses 6 and 7 forms the fourth stanza. There's another group that he speaks to in this and makes an appeal. Who would it be? It's not the Lord in this one. It's not his adversaries, and it's not even to himself. It's another group. He's making an appeal here to sympathizers. And think through where David's at. He's leaving Jerusalem, and he's got mighty men going along with him. And you see the question they ask. They end up asking the question, there's a lot who say, who's going to show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. We'll see some more about where that comes from later. They have questions that arise from what the promises are that we claim. But then David comes back with an answer. It's not an answer that's just intellectual or logical. It's actually experiential. The reason you can know that we do have favor is because there is more joy in my heart than all of those adversaries have when they get everything they want. Last stanza, verse 8. It's a response to all of these appeals. And it's again a parallelism. There is peace within that settles in the second line of the stanza with the Lord who does. It's not what I can do, it's what he does that gives peace within. And because I have peace within, what can I now do? I can lie down and sleep. Why? Because the second line in the stanza tells us, the Lord who does, he makes me to dwell in safety. So you see the progression and the structure of how this thing is put together? I think when we read through that, what we come out with is some understanding of this, maybe truth, or this line to capture the whole of it. Adversity calls for answers that guide and energize action. Adversity calls for answers that guide and energize action. How are we going to apply this? Adversity. We see adversity just put forward in the conversation that David is having with the Lord in prayer in verses 2, 3, and 6. He has adversity. There's problems without. There's enemies. In verse number 2, we see his honor. David's the king, and it is being put to shame. And it's not just that they're just shaming him, but there's actually lies that are being told about him. And it's actually people who love and look for more words that will actually destroy his position, his honor, his character. In this, what we're seeing these enemies do, the essence of who you are and what you do becomes the point that they cause you to see you're a failure. We're going to mock you in the very thing that you think, this is who I am and what I've been called to do. We're going to cause you to have doubt. And in large part, you know underneath, although often it causes you to question, that it's all based in misrepresentation or in distortions of what is, or just flat out lies. This is what Absalom had done at the gate for 4 years prior to the rebellion. He was catching people from all over Israel as they would come through and say, hey, what are you here for? Oh man, I wish I was the judge in Israel. You'd get a fair hearing. Somebody would take care of you. And the whole point there was not just to say what he could do, but was to impugn what David wouldn't do. But it's not just problems without that we see. There's also problems within. Verse number 6, you can see that there's questions that arise not just from the enemy, but it impacts those who are your allies. The people with you start thinking, wait a second, there's been a promise of favor for us, and it sure doesn't seem like it's working out. You see that phrase there in verse number 6 where it says, lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord? This is actually, we've said, that you need to be meditating on the way of the Lord, the instruction of the Lord. This is, in essence, a quote from Numbers chapter 6. You've heard it before. Numbers 6, 24 through 26 says this. See if you don't recognize it when I start. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So these friends are pointing to the promise of the Lord. And then they're looking at the scenario and saying, it's not working out. How do you answer those guys? Because it doesn't seem like it's working out. Then you've got to figure out, okay, what do we do with this now? How do we take this advice? How do we give advice to those who are having questions? I can't help but think of the fact, as David is leaving and retreating from Jerusalem and heading towards the fords of the Jordan. You remember this dude, his name is Shimei, who comes alongside. So what do David's allies say should happen to Shimei? Yeah. Hey, do you want us to just go take that dude out? And inside, let's be honest, what do we all think? Absolutely. But David instead can somehow be angry and understand that this is not right, be distraught, be hurt, and not respond in kind. If there's anything we see about adversity in the way that this text brings out these problems without and these problems within, it would be this. Adversity is less about the hardship that you face, and it's more about the questions they spawn. Questions regarding God's favor. Questions regarding God's care. And if we're honest, sometimes questions that even regard, is he here? When shame is brought on you, when untruths about you are believed, it is so easy to question God's goodness. So what do we do? Second part of our little catchphrase, adversity calls for answers. Answers. David is going to pray to the Lord, and there's three prayer expressions that we see in verse 1, verse 3, and verse 7 in the text here. In this, here's what he's going to do. He's going to request and remind himself of the reality. Hang with me. Verse number 1, request. What are the words that David uses in speaking to the Lord here? What is he asking him to do? He first says, answer me. It's fascinating because it's the only one of those that's put with a reference to the God to whom he speaks, right? And what does he say? Answer me. And how does he address the Lord? God of my righteousness. We hear righteousness, and a lot of times we think about moral correctness or moral conformity, but the word is much larger than that. He is appealing to the God who sees that things are not as they should be. They're not right. They're not right as regards relationship to God, and they're, as a result, not right in the way that relationships work out among people. And he is begging this God, who is the God of righteousness, to set things right with his answer. And in it, he ends up following that up. It's be gracious and hear. So hear the tone. This is not a demanding tone. You owe me an answer, God. Oh no. This is a tone that recognizes that anything good I receive from you is a gift. I am dependent upon grace. So please, Lord, I'm not perfect. Please be gracious. And hear me when I cry. That word hear, that's fascinating too. You know, hear can carry a number of thoughts. I mean, if the Canadian geese go flying by honking, I can hear that. Sound waves hit my inner ear and I end up, there's a noise, but that's not what this word is carrying the connotation of. Has anybody ever had a parent look at you and say, listen? Are they asking you just to hear the noise bounce off your eardrum? No, they're asking you to hear, to listen unto action. Hear what's said and bring a response. It's what a coach is asking for in a game. It's what an army commander is asking for on the battlefield. The only difference is this is like bottom up asking. As opposed to the one who's in charge asking, it's the one who's underneath. It's the child who's saying, but please listen, Dad. It's the player who's saying, Coach, this is what I'm seeing. Please listen. It's the soldier who looks to the commander and says, please listen. I want to tell you something that elicits response. So requesting of God is completely within the context of what should happen here. Bring him your request. But he doesn't stop there. He goes to reminders in the seeking of answers. This is so crucially important. In verses 1 and 3, we're going to see this. In verse 1, he's not just going to point to reminders of like, and we've already mentioned this somewhat, doctrinal truth. He's going to actually get down into experiential reminders. What does he say when he says, in between, answer me and be gracious in verse number 1? What he says is, you have given me relief when I was in distress. What is David doing here? He's remembering the past faithfulness of God to answer when he called. And you've seen this in David's life, have you not? When he comes up and Goliath is out there, what does he reference back to? Hey, I was a boy in the field, and there was a bear, and there was a lion. And the Lord, you gave me strength to kill that bear and lion, and you can give me strength to take out the giant. He can point back to how God was faithful in the battle with Goliath. He can point back to how God was faithful as Saul had murderous intent and made actual attempts to take David out, and they didn't succeed. So he's not just saying some truth in his head. He's saying a truth that he's lived. But that's not to negate theological reminders. We need experiential reminders, and we need theological reminders. That is truths about God. Look at verse number 3. He says, Lord, you have set apart the godly for yourself. This is echoing back to what's already been said in Psalm 2. Lord, you have set your anointed to rule on your holy hill, and you have promised that those who are his will find refuge in him. In Psalm 1, he talks about the fact that the Lord knows the righteous and they will stand in the judgment. And he then lastly says in that verse, hear when I call. This is not new. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 6 says, what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him. He looks back at what's happened, and then he looks into what's been revealed as truth to remind him that if my people, his son, David's son later will say this beautifully, if my people will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven. I will forgive them, and I will heal their land. So just quick note, prayer that is heard remembers the God who has spoken. For he is faithful to himself, and he is faithful to those who are his. Answers are found via request, via reminders, and then there's a remembrance of reality. You see it in verse number 7. There's a recognition that David is going to have here of what is real beyond what is immediate. Beyond what's right in my face at this morning that clouds all of my thinking and all my perceptions of reality. Beyond what seems to be carrying the day. Verse number 7 is an answer to a real question from verse number 6. You remember it? When are we going to see any good towards us? You know, the God who promised that he would cause his face to shine on us. The answer comes in verse 7. You, the Lord, have put more joy in my heart than they have. They have joy, but it's all circumstantial. It's based, and this is an agrarian society, it's based in their wine and their grain being multiplied. But guess what happens to their joy when the season is dry? And just as the rain falls on the just and the unjust, so does the hard time. And when those who are relying on circumstances for their joy hit the hard time, their joy dries up. It's not grain and wine in our society. I understand that. But it might be physical possessions. It might be the security you get in physical possessions. It might actually be a domination over your surroundings. That can be in so many arenas, politically, financially, socially. It might be just how can I maintain my popularity? I just want people to like me. It might be in the attainment of pleasure. I want to do what I like, and it feels good. But compare the two joys. All of those things, they're temporary. They're not eternal. They have a finite, challengeable strength that's their source, not omnipotence. There is one who knows. Here's the beauty that brings joy. There is one who knows everything about you, good and bad. And he still pursues you. And he still provides for you. He doesn't abandon you when you become inconvenient or when you're no longer satisfying to him. So the answer to your friend's questions about what in the world, God must not be on your side. I mean, he's made promises. Is this even real? And frankly, it may not be your friend's questions. It may be the internal questions that you're grappling with. It's not less than truth. Remember, we need reminders. of what he's revealed about himself and what he's done. But it's more than that. The answer is the joy that we receive in the unshakable, caring, righteous God who knows the beginning from the end. And he promises he's going to care for his own. If you have that, there is a confidence and a calm that can be had in the middle of whatever turmoil is going on around you. Which leads to this. Adversity does call for answers, but those answers then guide and energize action. Action. Verses 4 through 5 and verse 8 actually gives us action points. And in a nutshell, it's going to ask us to respond in trust and rest in security. I want you to look at the couplets here. In verses 4 and 5, you have like two parts to each line, and then the parts in the second line correspond. So look how they inform one another. In verse 4, what does he tell you to do with this wrong circumstance? He says to be angry. Be agitated. Feel the emotion. Feel the injustice. Don't sweep it under the rug and act like it's not real. It's there. It's true, and it should agitate. But if you go to the second line, what do you do with that anger? Offer right sacrifices. I don't know about you, but the natural tendency when opposed or offended or done wrongly is to retaliate. I want to get them back. And I'm entitled to now. I'm going to take justice into my own hands. But the instruction here is to offer right sacrifices. Now, I want you to note, a response is validated, even called for. But it's not the same response that the world's going to give. So you say, okay, what does that mean? What do I do? Make a note of Romans chapter 12, verses 18 through 21. That, in a nutshell, is going to say, overcome evil. Yes, overcome, resist. Overcome evil with good. You do need to respond, but respond in a way that seeks peace, not destruction. You do need to defend what's right, but you are not the one that is there to exact revenge and vengeance. So that text in Romans 12 actually says, feed your enemy. And as you feed your enemy, you're actually heaping burning coals on their head. You are bringing conviction and confrontation as to the wrong actions that are being taken by them, the evil, by the counterintuitive way in which you respond with good. This is David retreating from Jerusalem, and the guy over here cursing him, and he says, no sword. It's the same thing he does on the way back from Jerusalem after Absalom has been killed, and he's going to go back to the throne, and that guy comes, he's one of the first ones to come and say, please forgive me. What would natural tendency want to do to that guy? Where's the nearest tree to hang him? And David said, there'll be no bloodshed this day. You may say, how in the world is that possible? How can you respond that way when you've been hurt? Well, the second part of each line in the couplet helps us to understand. Be angry, but the instruction is without sin. Don't miss the mark as you respond with legitimate anger to the injustice. And that is able to happen because in the second line, you ponder on your bed in silence. We are so distracted and very seldom take time to think. And yet the Psalms are encouraging us that the rehearsal of truth in the face of confusion gives clarity in the confusion because it sees beyond the confusion. Does that make sense to you, what I just said? Rehearsing truth when you're in the middle of the melee, the confusion. It gives clarity in the middle of it because it sees beyond it. Ponder. Have we seen that word so far in the Psalms anywhere? You remember Psalm 1? Delight yourself in the law of the Lord and meditate. Another couplet to help us know what actions should occur. Verse 8. This sounds so passive, and yet it's actually such strength. What does he call for us to do in the middle of this hardship? Lie down and sleep. But that's coupled with something. It's not lying down and sleep like, oh, well, so be it. I guess I'm out. Y'all going to take me down. Why can you lie down and sleep? Because the connector in the next line says, because I dwell in safety. Why do I dwell in safety? Is it something that I have manufactured and made happen? What does that say? Who does it? The Lord makes me to dwell in safety. And because he makes me dwell in safety, what can my disposition be? Peace. We get ourselves here in a position where it's not about me protecting myself by isolating myself. In other words, let me just retreat from everything that's hard. And it's not by domination. It's not by me crushing any enemy that comes along. And we see that all the time, especially now in our culture. But rather, this puts me in a position to bravely confront what is wrong in a way that respects my own self-dignity and even has a respect for the self-dignity of the one who is less than what he should be as an image bearer. Now, let's be real. If you take this approach to the hardships and the oppressions and the enemies outside and within, might you lose? You might. There are martyrs who've lost their life. But let me encourage you with this. In losing your life this way, you'll find it. There will be a joy and a peace in your soul that outstrips all of the stressfully gained and retained security that you can get via trust in your own self or in some other entity other than the Lord God himself. Adversity calls for answers that guide and encourage action. Let's close with just a prompt for our prayer practice this week. So these first two are going to be just like a sit-down project for you, okay? Not a long project. Nobody wants a long project. But a quick sit-down project. So there's two parts to it. Number one, here's what I want us to do. Remember times of distress in your life when you have been relieved. Actively think through what are the times in my life when I was in distress and God brought relief. A part of this particular prompt Parents, you might have young children who haven't gone through a lot of life to experience a whole bunch of, I've honestly been against this. This would be an opportunity for you to share with your children the genuine hardship that you've faced, appropriately, but the hardship that you've faced and the deliverance that the Lord has granted. Our kids need to hear from us how the Lord has provided, how the Lord has delivered, how he has brought joy and peace when it's not always been rosy. So that's the first thing. Sit down and remember times of distress where you were relieved. And then the second part of this sit-down project is to be real with the injustice or the difficulty in the relationships you now face. Do you see the contrast? Look at your past and see where God has delivered. Now look at your present. And let's be honest about where there's injustice and where there's difficulty in relationships that you're facing. Now, the scriptures actually speak to this. If you're having a hard time because of your own wrongdoing, that's not a reason to call upon the Lord for his mercy and grace. You need to repent. But if you have sought to follow the Lord and you have been treated in an unjust fashion from without, or to be perfectly honest, maybe even from within, maybe from your family of origin, you've had certain things that keep coming back in your head that you're somehow at fault here. So do we have those two things? Remember times of distress when you found relief, and then secondly, be real with injustice or difficulty in relationships you now face. And then the last part of the prompt is, this is a request for us to each evening participate in. So each evening, in quiet, on your bed, I want you to think about your adversities. And I want you to call out injustice where you see it. I don't know if you've heard this before from anybody, like, be agitated. If it's wrong, say it's wrong. Say it's unjust. So you can start there. Don't stop there, though. Ask God for answers. So think about your adversity. Ask God for answers. Don't presume. Ask him to hear you. Ask him for grace. Ask him for joy and peace in the midst of it. And then, as you're there, respond appropriately. Feel the agitation, because to appropriately point out that which is unjust is good for you, for the others who are being hurt, and for the whole, even the one who's hurting you. And then lastly, respond with righteousness. Don't take this to a place of vengeance. I'm going to make them pay. But let your asking for answers and thinking through who the Lord is and what he's like press you to doing good. The thing that would promote justice and convey gospel care to them, to those who are your friends, to yourself. Okay? And let's just see what the Lord does in our hearts.